Some lights never fade, even when the men who carried them are long gone. In the swamps of North Carolina, a headless signalman still waves his lantern. Thousands of miles away in Stockholm, an empty silver train glides through dark tunnels, never stopping for the living. And beneath Boston, commuters whisper of a ghostly blue line train that drifts through the underground, taking passengers who never return. Tonight, you will follow the tracks of the dead. On lonely nights in the late 1800s, when the countryside of North Carolina was quiet and the wind carried only the chirping of crickets, a strange glow began to haunt a stretch of track near the town of Mako. It wasn't fire, it wasn't lantern light. Witnesses swore it was something otherworldly, an orb that floated just above the railroad, bobbing as though carried by an invisible hand. From a distance, it seemed to swing side to side, the way a brakeman might signal in the dark. Locals soon began to whisper that it belonged to Joe Baldwin, a railroad man who had lost more than just his life on those rails. The story of Baldwin was told in hushed voices, as though speaking it too loudly might summon him. He had been a brakeman, a job that demanded vigilance. One stormy night, his train broke apart, the caboose pulling away from the cars ahead. Baldwin realized with horror that another train was thundering down the track from behind. If it struck the detached caboose, the wreck would be catastrophic. In desperation, Baldwin grabbed his lantern and ran to the rear platform, swinging it wildly, his arms slicing the night in frantic arcs. His last act was meant to save lives, but fate was cruel. The two trains collided, crushing the caboose and mangling Baldwin in the wreck. Some swore his body was left headless, the lantern found shattered beside him. Not long after his death, the light appeared. Men working the line were the first to see it floating just above the rails where Baldwin had fallen. It moved with uncanny purpose, not drifting like swamp fire or mist, but swinging side to side, as if someone were still waving a warning. Engineers swore they saw it too. Passengers peered from their windows and gasped as the glow passed by their cars. Even whole train crews insisted the phantom lantern accompanied them for miles before vanishing into the night. The light became more than a rumor. Newspapers reported it. Travelers began stopping in Mako, hoping for a glimpse. Couples drove their buggies out on moonless nights and waited, whispering nervously as they watched the horizon. Children dared each other to walk the tracks at midnight. The image of a glowing lantern swinging toward them lodged deep in their imaginations. For many, it was not merely a light, it was Joe Baldwin himself searching for something he had lost. Some said he wandered the rails, trying to reclaim his missing head. Others believed his spirit was forever warning trains, condemned to relive the night of his death again and again. And then there was the night the president himself saw it. Grover Cleveland, riding a train through North Carolina in the 1880s, reported the strange light floating along the tracks. His sighting gave the legend a weight that no folklore alone could provide. The railroad company could no longer ignore the stories. Conductors began to treat the light with an odd respect, acknowledging it in quiet tones as though Baldwin were still one of their own. Some even claimed the phantom lantern once served as a warning, appearing just before danger struck. Yet the mystery only deepened. For every explanation, swamp gas, strange refractions of headlights, tricks of weather, there were 10 accounts that didn't fit. Too many people saw the light swing deliberately, like an arm moving with urgency. Too many swore it responded to them hovering, pulsing brighter, or disappearing only to reappear again farther down the track. By the early 1900s, the legend was unstoppable. The Mako light became part of local identity, woven into songs, stories, and whispered dares. People would drive out into the dark, shut off their engines, and sit in silence, waiting for the faint glow to appear. For some, it was thrilling. For others, it was chilling. And for a handful, it was terrifying, because they swore the light wasn't just wandering the tracks. They claimed it was watching. One man, a farmer from the outskirts of Mako, told neighbors that he had seen the glow up close, hovering just a few feet away from him. He swore he saw the outline of a hand clutching it, pale, faint, yet unmistakable. When the light blinked out, he stumbled back, realizing he had been standing at the very place Baldwin had died. His voice shook as he told the story. but he warned others never to follow the light, because if you did, he said, you might not return. And so the legend grew, and with it, the fear that Baldwin's lantern wasn't just a haunting, it was a warning. A desperate, eternal plea carried on the wind and glowing in the night. As decades passed, the Mako light became a pilgrimage. Teenagers snuck out of their homes, parking cars by the old line, daring each other to step onto the rails. Young couples treated it like a ritual, whispering about Baldwin's fate as they searched the horizon for the first faint shimmer. Sometimes they left disappointed. Other times they returned wide-eyed, swearing they had seen the glow floating toward them before it blinked into nothing. For some, that was enough a brush with the unexplained, a thrill of the supernatural. But for others, it left scars that would never fade. One engineer claimed he saw the light drift directly into the path of his locomotive. Convinced someone was on the track, he pulled the brakes, sending sparks into the night as the train screeched to a halt. But when he climbed down, lantern in hand, there was nothing. Only silence. His crew muttered prayers as he climbed back aboard, shaken to the bone. Another account told of a group of boys who chased the light into the woods, determined to prove it was nothing more than a trick. Hours later, they returned pale and trembling, unable or unwilling to describe what they had seen in the dark. As the legend deepened, darker whispers emerged. Some claimed the light wasn't just Baldwin's signal, it was Baldwin himself, searching endlessly for the head he had lost that night. Locals began to warn children, never stand too close to the light, or Baldwin's ghost might mistake you for what he seeks. Parents repeated the story, half as caution, half as tradition. But every so often, a story surfaced of someone who had vanished near the tracks, a hunter, a drifter, a child who wandered too far. Always the same ending, gone without a trace, as though the lantern had led them into the dark and refused to let them go. In the 1970s, the railroad was dismantled. The iron tracks that had carried the white train, the passenger lines, and Baldwin's final ride were pulled up, leaving behind only dirt and weeds, and with them, the Mako light disappeared. Some said it proved the legend had been nothing more than tricks of atmosphere, dependent on the rails, but others disagreed. They claimed the light had only lost its tether, its anchor in this world, that it still roamed, searching for the tracks that no longer existed. Even after the line vanished, sightings continued. Not as frequent, not as dramatic, but enough to keep the fear alive. Hikers reported glimpses of a pale glow moving through the trees. Campers whispered of seeing a lantern swing in the distance, even when no one else was there. Some claimed the light was stronger in storms, as though thunder and rain pulled Baldwin back from the night of his death, forcing him to replay his final desperate act. And yet, the legend carries a final warning. Not da-da-da-da. In Mako, people still whisper that the light is not always content to wander alone. They say that if you stare too long into its glow, it might begin to follow you home. One woman swore she saw the faint glimmer outside her window for weeks after her midnight visit to the tracks. At first she thought it was headlights from the road, but each time she looked, it was there hovering, swaying, waiting. And then, one night it vanished. The next morning her dog was gone. Whether Baldwin's lantern is a haunting, an omen, or something far worse, no one can say. What is certain is that the Mako light left a scar deep in the land and in the people who lived there. A story passed down not only as a curiosity, but as a warning. Never follow the light. Because perhaps Joe Baldwin is not searching for his head. Perhaps he is searching for company. And if the light ever appears before you, floating, swaying, waiting, don't stare too long. Don't let it draw you in, because once it chooses you, it may never let you go. You might find yourself walking the darkened rails with Baldwin, swinging a lantern that never dies, searching endlessly for something you'll never find. The last trains of the night had already passed through the tunnels, leaving the Stockholm metro unusually quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed weakly overhead, casting pale reflections across the polished steel tracks. Anyone standing alone on a platform at this hour could hear the soft echo of their own breath bouncing against the tiled walls. In that stillness, rumors whispered through the city like a hidden current. There was talk of a train that didn't belong to any schedule, a train that shouldn't exist. They called it the Silver Pylon, the Silver Arrow. Unlike the green trains that were familiar to commuters, the Silver Pylon was bare, aluminum, raw, and metallic, with no paint to soften its gleam. Under dim lights, it shimmered with a ghostly glow, as though it wasn't entirely real. It had been built in the 1960s as an experiment, never meant to be a permanent fixture. Its odd design made people uncomfortable. It looked unfinished, stripped of life. Whenever it appeared on the tracks, it left passengers uneasy, unsure if they were looking at a machine or something much colder. At first, people thought its rarity was what gave rise to the stories. The train would show up on random lines at random times, sometimes when no train was listed on the schedule at all. Witnesses claimed it arrived without warning, sliding into the station as silently as a shadow. Its doors opened with a hiss, but instead of the usual hum of conversation inside, there was nothing but stillness. A few commuters said they had seen pale faces pressed against the windows, unmoving eyes fixed on nothing. Others swore the carriages were nearly empty, stripped bare, with fluorescent lights buzzing and flickering like a morgue. The legend said if you stepped onto the Silver Pylon, you wouldn't return. It carried its passengers deep underground, further than the official map allowed. There was talk of an abandoned station called Kimling, a half-built stop that was never opened to the public. Locals said it belonged to the dead, not the living. "Only the dead get off at Kimling," they whispered. The word spread like a warning, but curiosity has a way of testing boundaries. And in the quiet hours of the night, some passengers couldn't resist when those silver doors slid open. In the 1970s and 1980s, the sightings multiplied. People who claimed to have boarded spoke of a sudden chill that wrapped around them like a shroud. The moment they stepped inside, they felt eyes on them, though no one spoke, no one moved. The ride stretched on, far longer than it should have, with no familiar stops, only the dark blur of tunnels flashing past the windows. When the doors finally opened, some said they found themselves in places they didn't recognize. Others vanished for days, only to reappear disoriented, unable to explain where they had been. Skeptics dismissed it as folklore. They said the metallic design of the Silver Pylon unsettled people and the harsh lighting made imaginations run wild. Yet too many witnesses told eerily similar stories. The idea of a ghost train moving silently beneath Stockholm rooted itself in the city's subconscious. And for every skeptic who denied it, there was someone else who swore they had seen silver rush past in the dark, a flicker that shouldn't have been there. Even today, after the train was retired, stories persist. Late-night travelers claim to hear the faint rush of wheels on tracks, though no train is scheduled. Some insist they've glimpsed a silver reflection vanish into the blackness. The Silver Pylon may have been scrapped, but legends rarely die with steel. Instead, they sink deeper, feeding on silence, waiting for the right moment to return. Part 1 ends here, with the tension swelling like a distant storm. The tunnels remain quiet for now, but something waits in the dark. A train that doesn't belong. It's a choice that no one should have to make. The clock inside the station read past midnight. A man named Eric stood alone on the deserted platform, clutching his worn leather bag. He worked late shifts often, but tonight felt different. The station lights flickered more than usual, and the silence pressed down heavy. Like the whole city had gone to sleep above him. He kept glancing at the dark tunnel, reminding himself the last train had already passed. He should have taken the stairs and called a taxi, but something kept him rooted to the spot. That was when he heard it, the faint rush of air, the low metallic rumble rolling closer. His chest tightened. Schedule said no train was due, but the sound was undeniable, swelling into the station like a tide. Then he saw it, the silver gleam of metal sliding out of the dark. The Silver Pylon glowed under the harsh lights, its unpainted body catching every flicker, making it look alive. The doors slid open with a sigh. The carriage was nearly empty. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating bare walls, stripped seats and windows fogged as though from breath. Eric hesitated, but a strange pull gnawed at him. He stepped inside. The doors closed at once, sealing him in. The air grew colder. He turned his head, and that was when he noticed them. Figures sat scattered across the carriage, silent and pale, their faces expressionless. Their eyes did not meet his, yet he felt them watching. None of them moved. The train lurched forward, faster than it should, plunging into the dark tunnels. Eric's heartbeat pounded against his ribs. Stop after stop should have passed by, yet none appeared. Time stretched thin. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and with each flicker the faces around him seemed closer, their hollow eyes fixed more firmly on him. He clutched the rail, willing the ride to end, but the train only pushed deeper underground. At last the doors opened. Eric stepped out onto a platform he had never seen before. The air smelled of dust and decay. Tiles were cracked, graffiti half scrubbed away, wires dangling from the ceiling. Kimling, the unfinished station. His breath caught as he remembered the words. Only the dead get off here. He tried to retreat, but the doors slid shut behind him. The silver pylon roared away, leaving him alone in the silence. He wandered down the deserted platform, each step echoing like a hammer strike. The shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and faint whispers drifted from the empty tunnels. He called out, his voice shaking, but no one answered. That was when he saw movement at the far end. The pale figures from the train stood there, still waiting. One by one, they began to step forward, their feet soundless against the concrete. Eric turned and ran. The tunnels twisted endlessly, leading him deeper, not out. Every turn brought him back to the same empty platform, the same cracked tiles. The whispers grew louder, words he could almost understand, like voices calling him to stay. His legs burned, his chest heaved, but no matter where he ran, Kimling held him like a cage. The last thing he heard was the rush of a train approaching, though he couldn't see it. The sound roared past him, shaking the ground. He pressed himself against the wall as the silver pylon screamed through the tunnel, its windows filled with faces, pale, hollow, and endless. In the brief flash, he thought he saw his own reflection among them. Back on the surface, commuters still tell the story. Some whispered that the silver pylon still runs, carrying those who can't escape their own fate. And if you ever find yourself standing alone on a platform past midnight and a silver train slides silently from the tunnel, remember the choice is yours. Step aboard or let it pass. But if you do step inside, be prepared for the doors to close and for the journey to never bring you back. The Blue Line of Boston's subway system is a steady artery, carrying people from the heart of the city to the edge of the coast. By day it feels alive with chatter, footsteps, and the rush of trains. But past midnight, when the crowds vanish and the tunnels stretch into silence, the line becomes something else entirely. The sound changes, the echoes deepen, and the darkness feels thicker, almost alive. It is in these hours that the whispers begin, the ones commuters pass down like warnings. They speak of a train that doesn't appear on any schedule, a train that looks familiar but isn't. They call it the Blue Line Ghost Train. The legend traces back to the early days of the tunnels, when accidents were far too common. Expansions of the East Boston Tunnel brought collapses, sudden floods, and electrocutions. Some workers died instantly, others were trapped, their last moments swallowed by the black soil beneath the city. It wasn't long before people began to believe the tunnels had absorbed all that pain, and that energy was restless, returning in the form of something no one could quite explain. Those who've claimed to see it describe the ghost train in different ways. To some it looks like any other Blue Line car, its lights glowing against the tunnel walls, but there's something wrong in the way it moves. Its motion is too smooth, its arrival too silent. Others insist it appears translucent, like it's made of smoke or mist, the kind of vision your eyes refuse to focus on, as though reality itself doesn't want you to see it. And then there are those who swear it looks solid, but the passengers inside aren't alive. Witnesses describe faces at the windows pale, unmoving, blank expressions that never blink. Some stare straight ahead, others appear to be watching the people on the platform. No one speaks, no one shifts in their seats. They sit frozen, as if time has abandoned them. The silence that follows is even worse than the sight itself. When the doors slide open, they do so without the familiar chime. As if the train isn't really welcoming you, it's daring you. One of the earliest and most chilling reports came from a Blue Line operator in the 1950s. He saw lights bearing down on him in the tunnel, another train racing forward when none should have been there. His instincts screamed collision, and he slammed the brakes, bracing for impact. But the other train didn't crash. It passed straight through his car, like smoke rushing past steel, and vanished into the dark. The operator staggered out, pale and trembling, telling his supervisors what happened. They dismissed it as fatigue, but whispers spread. Over the years, more operators reported the same impossible encounter. Commuters, too, have their stories. Some late-night riders say they saw the train glide silently into a station, doors opening with no one inside. Others insist they saw passengers, but none who belonged at this time. Men in outdated uniforms, women in long coats from decades past, all staring blankly as if caught mid-thought, their faces drained of life. Those who dared to step inside described a biting cold that seeped into their skin the moment they crossed the threshold. The seats felt strange, warped, as if they weren't solid. Time itself seemed to stretch, minutes dissolving into hours. And then, just as suddenly, the train would vanish, leaving them stranded in places they didn't recognize. Skeptics brush it off as exhaustion and suggestion. The Blue Line tunnels are old, damp, and filled with noises that confuse the ear. Lights flicker, shadows dance, and the rushing air can sound like an approaching train. For a tired commuter, it's easy to believe the mind conjures a phantom where none exists. Yet too many accounts repeat the same details. The pale figures, the silent arrival, the icy air that lingers long after the train is gone. Even now, decades later, the stories continue. Some say they've seen faint lights deep in the tunnel when no train was scheduled. Others claim to hear the grinding of wheels echoing down the tracks, only for nothing to appear. The legend has become part of the city itself, retold like a warning whispered in the dark. And for those who believe, the fear lingers every time they stand alone on a platform after midnight, staring into the black mouth of the tunnel, waiting for something that shouldn't exist to come rushing out. Part 1 ends here, with the train still just a story on most nights. But not all stories stay stories. Sometimes they come roaring to life when you least expect them. It was past 1 in the morning when Daniel found himself alone on the platform at Aquarium Station. He had missed the last scheduled train home, but instead of leaving, he stayed, pacing the tiles with restless steps. The station felt different at this hour, the fluorescent lights dimmer, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. He kept glancing at the tunnel, telling himself he was foolish for waiting, but something inside him whispered to stay. Then came the sound. At first it was subtle, like a distant rush of air, but it grew louder. Unmistakable, the deep metallic grind of wheels on tracks. Daniel froze, his breath catching. No trains were supposed to run, yet from the tunnel to glowing headlights pierced the dark. The Blue Line train glided into the station, but something was wrong. It moved too quietly, its arrival too smooth. The car gleamed, its windows misted, and as the doors slid open, the air that poured out was so cold, it made Daniel's skin prickle. Inside, the carriage looked almost normal, except for the figures seated in rows. They were still as statues, faces pale, eyes hollow. None of them blinked. None of them breathed. Daniel felt his body tense, every instinct screaming to turn away. But another part of him, deeper and harder to fight, urged him forward. Against reason, he stepped inside. The moment his foot touched the floor, a chill raced through him like ice in his veins. The doors sealed behind him. The train jerked forward, plunging into the tunnel at unnatural speed. Daniel gripped the rail, his knuckles white, his eyes darting to the passengers. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating, like invisible eyes crawling over his skin. The lights flickered overhead, and with each pulse of darkness, he swore their heads shifted closer, their gazes tightening on him. Time dissolved. Minutes stretched into something endless, and Daniel couldn't tell how far they had gone. The train didn't stop at any familiar station. Outside the windows was only darkness, broken by flashes of old brick walls, damp and crumbling. Then, finally, the train slowed. The doors opened with a hiss. He stepped onto a platform he had never seen before. The air was thick with dust, the tiles cracked, graffiti smeared across half-finished walls. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. The place was abandoned, incomplete, and yet it felt alive. His breath faltered as the name on the wall came into view, Kimling. The station that was never supposed to exist on this side of the ocean. Daniel turned, ready to retreat, but the train was gone. He was alone. The silence pressed heavy until a sound rose from the far end of the platform. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing against the walls. He squinted into the dark, and then he saw them. The passengers from the train, pale, lifeless figures stepping forward in unison, their eyes locked on him. He ran, sprinting down the platform and into the tunnels. But the tunnels twisted, endless, leading him back to the same place. Every path circled back to the platform, to those waiting figures. Whispers began to fill the air, faint at first, then louder, overlapping voices that seemed to know his name. His chest burned, his legs ached, but the figures were closing in. Then, the sound of another train came rushing from the darkness. Daniel pressed himself against the wall as the phantom blue line screamed past, its windows filled with faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, pale and blank. In the fleeting reflection, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Among those hollow faces, staring out from the glass, was his own. Back on the surface, commuters still tell the story. They whisper that the Blue Line ghost train is more than a legend, that it waits for those who linger too long in the silence of the tunnels. And if you ever find yourself alone after midnight, staring into the black depths of the tracks, be careful. If a train glides in without a sound, its doors sliding open with an icy breath, you might want to turn away, because once you step inside, there may be no coming back.